Welcome to Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association. I'm Kenneth Kinney, but friends call me Shark. And like you, I'm a professional speaker and I love listening to Speakernomics. Speakernomics is the professional speaker show that will help you thrive and grow a speaking business so you too can change the world. One keynote session, workshop, and speech at a time. And on this episode, we're doing something a little different. We're welcoming a family dynasty in the making. First, Phil Van Hooser is a CSP, a Hall of Famer, a Cavett Award recipient, past president of NSA, an author, trainer, and legend in the sport of speaking. And let's also welcome his daughter-in-law, Alyson Van Hooser. She's a keynote speaker, leadership expert, author, a former industry expert, even elected a city council member, as well as a leadership expert in a role that we all must appreciate. She's a mom to 4. She's also a master board breaker with her karate chops, if you've ever seen her get pulled up on a main stage at Influence. Phil and Alyson, welcome to Speakernomics. How are you today?
Doing great.
Thank you so much, Shark. We appreciate you.
Appreciate it. Now to all my speaking friends, you're building a brand. You're the name they all want to know as that go-to expert, right? But like in any business, by name, all of that focus gets dedicated on you. So what happens if life gets in the way, or if you simply want to build a brand big enough to pass it on to the next generation? How do you go about doing that? That's what we're going to cover today. And before we jump in, make sure to go to speakernomics.com. That's where you can find the tips, insights, and knowledge to help you become a better speaker, build a better business, and get paid to speak. Phil and Alyson, let's dive in. So this was an incredibly interesting move. Phil, I want to start with you. At what point did you decide to move your brand away from just your first and last name to a family name? Because there's a web traffic, digital identity, SEO play, if you will, that you have to understand there. But if you will, what made you move that to a family brand name, website, URL, and why did you do it?
You know, when I first started the business, and this is 1988, I have a fairly unique last name, Van Hooser. There's not a lot of us out there. And I thought that would be a name that maybe people could remember a little bit. And I'll be honest with you, at that stage in my professional speaking career, there was a little ego involved. But as we have gone along, I realized that it's less about who I am and it's more about what we do. And so as Alyson has come into the business, and you'll talk about that in a minute, we've sort of expanded. I realized I probably never would have been able to sell the name Van Hooser Associates to anybody, but we can certainly sell Van Hooser Leadership, and that's where we've sort of transitioned our name, our brand, so that people become aware of who we are and what we do, and it can be Philip Van Hooser or Alyson Van Hooser or maybe others that will follow in years to come, but that's how we're transitioning the name.
Well, Alyson, when you think of some of the big names in the speaking industry, there's many of those that have an air quote best friend who they've referred a lot of gigs to and vice versa. A lot have built some legendary speaking businesses that way, but most of those don't literally keep it all in the family. So, Alyson, you've done extremely well as a speaker, as a leadership speaker as well. How do you approach what you offer versus what he offers to still stand out in the marketplace and create your own brand as a great speaker, but also keep it outside of what he does, but keep it inside the family as well?
Sure. So a lot of I would say almost 99.9% of my keynote work is 100% or is content that I have developed. But the training side of our business is where the relationship, the symmetry between Phil and I really comes together. You just asked Phil the question, how did you figure out this is what you wanted to do, that you wanted to pass it on? And my mind immediately goes to when I was 28 years old, I was on a phone call with Phil asking him, what do I do? What is the next step? What do you think? Phil's basically filled the father role in my life since I was a teenager. And I'm calling him for advice, and I'll just encapsulate it this way. Phil just basically said, I think it's obvious that there's people you can help, and there's work we can do together. Because one of the things that set my corporate career off to a whole nother level was using a process Phil developed called earning the right to be heard to sell an idea to a decision maker inside of the organization. I used that process to communicate with the executives it totally transformed the trajectory of my career and also gave me a launching point in the speaking industry. So how do we marry those two? 70% of my work right now is keynotes, 30% is training. When it comes to that training, I've worked to buy the intellectual property from Phil. I've implemented it in my own corporate career so I can speak to it from personal experience as to how it works, both from a step-by-step process, but also navigating the emotional side of it all. And then also, as we continue just to meet clients, what we're teaching is not trendy leadership, which I love. It's timeless, it's proven, it's refined. And so that becomes our competitive advantage too, that yes, I'm 35 years old. A lot of people might think you've still got a lot to learn, young lady. But what we know is that I can say the work that we've done, we've been refining it over the course of almost 40 years. And so I immediately have a leg to stand on that a lot of people struggle to get their feet up from under them right out the gate.
Well, Phil, how do you go about approaching building out your own business now versus what you compete against her? Not necessarily compete, but there's still the separate Phil, Alyson brands. And then also, how do you go about identifying when is a good time to co-present? I'm fascinated by people co-presenting, and I've seen that the two of you do that as well. When do you find out it's the right time to do that as well?
It's really interesting. There is no firm standard or template that we follow. There are some people that want me and my message because maybe they've worked with me over the years, or maybe they've followed me. We've developed a certain level of following, and that's always exciting. But there's other people, quite frankly, that know me, but they also know their audience won't respond as well to me as they would with Alyson. Let's face it. When I first started in this business in 1988, I usually, standing on the stage, either training or keynoting, I usually was one of the, if not the youngest person in the room. I was talking to older folks. Now I'm standing on the stage, and it's not uncommon at all for me to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest one in the room. And so that's transitioned completely. Now, I could make an argument, like a lot of us senior speakers I make, is that we've never been better than we are now. We know what we're talking about at a level that's quite frankly better than it ever has been. Our experiences are broader, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I can make that argument. But the fact of the matter is, the audience may want a younger speaker. Well, that's a perfect example and a perfect opportunity for me to hand this one off to Alyson. Well, you need to talk to Alyson then. Alyson and I, do you like my material, my content, then you're going to love Alyson. And that's really what I say. On the other hand, Alyson will come in occasionally and be talking to a client or a prospective client. And they'll say, well, we need somebody who knows a little bit more about this. And Alyson will say, well, Phil has a lot of experience. He's worked with that kind of organizations, or he's had that kind of experience. So we have an opportunity to come out with a concerted front to talk to people about, from a demographics, older folks, younger folks, et cetera. But that's not really what it's about. Leadership is leadership is leadership. And so we've got to show people how leadership at any generational step in the process can be achieved. Now, the other part of it is the co-presenting, if you will. We do, I don't know what our percentage of that is. I'd say 10% of our presentations. I don't know if Alyson, I've never counted it up, but we do keynotes and training sessions together. And quite frankly, I think the audience loves it because they're able to see sort of a different perspective on the same topic. Not that we compete at all, and not that we conflict with one another at all, but we sometimes look at things from a different perspective based on our worldview. And I think the audience sees the value in that as well. Now, is it easy? I have got to be willing to give up the stage. She's got to be willing to give up the stage. And for some speakers, that's really difficult. And we also have to be able to trust one another that when we do give up that stage, we're not giving up anything that's going to hurt the client. Alyson and I know each other. We love each other. She's been in our family for many, many years. I just consider it a blessing to have the opportunity to do it. And the audience seems to respond exceptionally well to it as well.
Yeah, Alyson, you said something too about this that Phil just alluded to that reminded me. You said, the young lady comment, which I love because I'm sure people have heard that, and I'm getting old enough to where I'm calling everybody young anymore. But how do you approach it being only 35? a lot of people may identify with an older man. And I know this is something that a lot of women have to compete against, but you still got to create. You're not Phil. That's one. You're obviously different, but you got to create your own brand of leadership, being a young woman in a, as Phil said, sort of a male-dominated world.
You've immediately made me think of Laurie Guest. Do you know Laurie?
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
She's incredible. I remember having dinner with her at Phil's house one night. Her husband came as well. We're sitting around the table, and one of the things, just a piece of advice she gave me was, you need to call out what they're thinking. And she could tell you the rest of that comment, but she would say, and I'm not going to give it away, but she would say, when I walk on stage, I immediately call out what they're probably thinking. And she said, you need to do the same. You're young, you're Southern, you're blonde, like, people can make a lot of assumptions based on that. And that really steered, especially how I start off a keynote. And how do I combat that? Being most often, as Phil said, one of the youngest people in the room. I know I have a draw. I've learned right off the bat, one of the things I do is I tell a story very quickly to make them go, oh, I wasn't thinking that. And it typically has something to do with how I grew up, because it sort of shifts their perspective. I've been told straight to my face that when you walk up on stage, I think there's somebody who's always had a silver spoon in their mouth, family, business, this and that. And I just shut that down right off the bat. And that allows them to at least be open to what I have to say. But I also tell that story, make them go, oh, snap, I was thinking about that differently. And then I ask for 53 minutes to prove everything I'm going to talk about. So I just call it out. I think that's how I combat it. But I would also say that's probably my natural communication style, just very direct, sharp, get straight to the point.
Well, when you and I first spoke on the phone, I remember telling you that I had just appreciated talking to somebody with the same accent I had. So I think it's a superpower anymore, not anything to hide behind at all. And Laurie Guest is brilliant. I still laugh every time I think of her talking about her McDonald's number 5 story, knowing what that was. I think it was number 5. But Phil, just a question for you. What do you think is harder, an audience of 100 skeptics or 4 grandkids?
Harder to it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to get them collectively thinking in one direction, grandkids are far harder. And it's not just 4, by the way. That's 4 that she's delivered to us. We have 9 in total, and they all are 1 year apart through the process. So you get them all together. I've been overwhelmed, outnumbered, if you will.
Well, I know that kids, there was a family circus cartoon that I saw one time that said the most important words grandkids can ever learn to say to the grandparents are please and thank you. But where do you want to see your business go throughout the rest of your career? And what advice would you give someone trying to replicate this their own way, of course, but trying to build this dynasty, if you will? I'm using that phrase liberally, but to bring more than just a keynote speaker, but to continue to build a legacy.
I never have thought about a legacy or a dynasty in those terms. I come from humble beginnings. I worked on the farm, but I went off to college and I got a business degree. And all I've done, quite frankly, is try to use what I learned and how I was educated to apply it to a situation of creating my own business. And our business has done very, very well. And I'm very thankful for that. But it's not been about trying to build a name, a legacy, a dynasty. It's about trying to do the right things at the right time at different stages in our career. And that's where I find myself right now. The reality of it is I'm far closer to the end of my career than I am or was to the beginning of my career. I still feel like I have a lot to offer, and I'm thankful that Alyson, as we've transitioned the leadership, she is now the president CEO of Van Hooser Leadership, while I sort of occupy a role of founder and chairman. We're still working hard day by day, shoulder to shoulder in the process, but Alyson is now leading this organization. And so at this particular point in my career, my number one goal is obviously to do for our audiences, for our clients, what they want and need and hire us to do. That's number one. But my number 2 goal then is to do everything I can to support Alyson so that she prepares herself and has the best foundation for continued success over hopefully the next 30 plus years as well. I mean, our business is a strange business. Everybody knows that. And for too many of us, the reality of it is when we come to the end of our business, be that 5, 10, 30, or 40 years, whatever, it really becomes that we just sort of turn off the light and walk out the door. I mean, it's over. And that's a shame. I mean, we have invested a lot of time and intellectual effort into this process. I want to see it continue. So from my standpoint, I'm far less concerned about dynasty. I'm far less concerned about what my personal legacy is in the business. I'm far more interested in making sure that we create a business that will be dynastic for Alyson and beyond. And I'm far more concerned about my legacy as a family member, a father-in-law, a grandfather, a father than I am of what somebody else thinks.
Yeah, and to make that point more succinct too, I think Alyson said it well earlier when she talked about what she was doing in the corporate world and borrowing from your framework, and she applied that. Again, most people I don't think enough about, they think of themselves as Phil Van Hooser on stage versus Phil Van Hooser's mark on leadership that Alyson or anyone can apply. And I think that's a better way of saying it, dynasty or legacy or whatever, but creating that trusted brand around a framework or an idea and building that out. So Alyson, one of the things that obviously you're privy to in a family environment is you're hanging out at Thanksgiving and Christmas and every other time in conversations. What do you tell a speaker who has the opportunity to spend a lot of time with a CSP, CPAE, and Cavett Award winner and former president? What do you learn that others should think about when they spend time with people like Phil that can help you? Obviously, your career's doing extremely well. You're speaking all the time. You've learned a lot. And that education came with a few more easy to schedule Zoom calls and phone calls than what I might have to go through.
You immediately make me think of all the windshield time Phil and I have had together. When we do training, sometimes we're on the road together for 3 hours one way. And so it has allowed us to get to know each other really well and me to pick his brain and for us to be able to make sure that we're on the same page before we're with the client. And it is important that that I don't take that for granted for a second. It's one of the reasons I'm committed to serving NSA Kentucky really well is because I realize that I've had my foot in the door. I've got more coaching and more help than a lot of other people might have access to. And so I'm sure not to take that for granted for a second. And what would I offer to somebody listening to this who's trying to build their speaking career and thinking, I want to mentor? And what advice would I give them? I would probably say that my advice would be to look for the character of the person and find a mentor, find a CSP that they're the same person on stage that they are off the stage. And maybe they're even better off the stage. But I would just encourage you, rather than looking for tips, look at the character, because that should shape how you build your business. One thing I'll say about Phil, and Phil, you can just cover your ears, is that I have learned from Phil that it truly is about the impact you make on the people in front of you, not the standing ovation, not the accolades, not who's talking about you and posting you on social media. It's the people who are right there, 10 toes down in front of you. How can you serve those people right now? And that's true of Phil, whether he's on a keynote stage, in a training room, in a mastermind, or he's sitting at on the couch, at Thanksgiving or Christmas, or if he's at church or in the community. Just being somebody that you're not in this business for ego, you're in this business for impact, I think. So if you have the opportunity to sit down with the best of the best in the industry, I would be more focused on getting to know them as a person and then spending time reflecting on that and what you can learn from that.
Great point. Now for a little speaking trivia. One of the most famous speeches of all time, the Gettysburg Address, was how long? Back with the answer in just a moment. Before we jump back to the show, here's a moment with speaker, coach, and NSA member Ike Chan. Ike, what does being part of NSA mean to you in your speaking business?
Wow, it means the world to me, NSA. I see my NSA as my family, my work family. Ever since I joined NSA about a couple years ago, and become an active member, going to conferences, it could have been, I think, 3 years. I have never been less of amazed by the people I met. So what do I mean? Yes, you run into Hall of Fame speakers that you don't even know exist, and then some so-and-so say hi, I'm like, oh, there's a Hall of Fame speaker. Oh my gosh, and then they're nicest people on earth. You wouldn't even know. And then you run into this person and that person. And my experience have been everyone, including you, like genuines. You're on top of your game in your domain or industry, and friendly, and everyone I've met really, really live the NSA value, like generosity, really want each other to succeed, create a bigger pie for everyone, right? Oh my God, now I sound like a commercial. No, because that's what I learned by talking to people and being in NSA. Also to me, now speaking well is one thing. I've been speaking in corporate. My former job, I was a corporate leader, and I was also a leader in companies and all that. So I've been speaking for, say, 10 years in corporate. But being a professional speaker is different. Just because you know how to speak really well, communicate intelligently, whatnot, it's not a business. The business part is what most professional speakers are lacking. So to me, people go to a school for MBA, right? Master in Business Administration, so they can become entrepreneurs, business leaders, right? So to me, NSA is kind of like my school. So I can get educated on the business of being a professional speaker. When I say professional speakers, it's not just about, glamorous being on stage, keynote speakers and all that. We all speak all the time. Now let's talk about on the business settings, right? Hey, I give a client a presentation because they want to buy from me or want my services. They want to know what it is. That is speaking. It's not posted on YouTube. It's not under the spotlight. It's just over Zoom or in person. So that's speaking. So there are many forms of speaking. So I would encourage everyone who wants to up your game as a speaker, a communicator, to communicate your great ideas to another person. You got to join NSA.
And here's the answer. Abraham Lincoln delivered the 1863 Gettysburg Address in only 2 minutes. The speech was only 272 words long. And now, back to the show. So a question I want to ask you from a previous guest is when things start to dry up a little bit, when you don't have the leads coming in as much as they did before, what are you doing to drum business up, to create some noise, get new leads, post on social, and all the things?
If that question is...
I haven't had...
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Phil.
Oh, go ahead, Alyson. You go.
I was just going to say, and I just came back from CLC. And if I had to give someone a tip, whether it's a new speaker or if it's someone who things have dried up, this is the one thing I would say. You're either going to pick up the phone or send emails, and I'm talking hundreds at a time. Because what I see far too often is people hoping, wishing, wondering they had business, but they simply need to execute. No more, we're not posting on social media. We're not creating a new YouTube video or trying to be a guest on a podcast. We're doing one-on-one conversation. That would hands down be the thing that I would recommend if someone is feeling like they're in a desert.
Bill, what would you recommend?
Not dissimilar to that at all, but going just a step deeper. And that is, for me, because I have a lot of clients and have worked with a lot of people over the years, I would start picking up the telephone and calling people I've worked with in the past, not to try to twist their arm to hire me, but rather to ask a very simple question. Where are your pain points today? What's happening out here? We know our business is different today than it was a year ago or 5 years ago or whatever. Is that true with you? And if it is, where are the pain points? Because I found that if you're working to help people solve their pain, they're looking for people to help them come alongside. And whether it's training or speaking, or whether it's consulting or conversations along the way, whether they pay or not, it's always going to be a learning experience. And for me, you know, we've certainly over 37, 38 years have had some down times, some that we could control, some that we couldn't control, i.e. 9/11, i.e. COVID, and so on and so forth. But as long as I'm talking to my clients or prospective clients, they're always giving me opportunities to help them help others. And so as a result, that's what I would be doing.
So, Alyson, I'm going to throw this one to you. What is a question that you would like to ask a future guest on this show?
I would ask a future guest on the show, knowing that you're going to get someone who's brilliant. I would ask them, what do I need to be most aware of when bringing on staff members? What do I need to be most aware, whether afraid of or expectant about, when it comes to bringing on new staff?
That's great. Well, follow-up question. Yeah, go ahead.
I would ask whoever you bring on, and I agree with Alyson, it's going to be someone who's brilliant. I would ask them, what are they willing to give up to get to the next level in their speaking career?
That's good. Well, how did you balance the work? I mean, it's not that just that you're friends, but you see each other all the time and you talk all the time. How do you balance a business? Because the first advice I would give anybody is never hire friends. And when you pull family in, that makes it even that much tougher. It's tough to run a family business.
I want to stress that you're talking to Alyson and I about our relationship together, but there are two other Van Hoosers that are critical to the operation of this organization too. My wife has been in the business with me for 38 years. I argue, and I've said this to many of my speaking colleagues, my wife knows more about the speaking business than 95% of the speakers in the speaking business know. And I could justify that. I mean, and so Alyson knows the value that Susan brings. And just about 5 or 6 months ago, Alyson's husband, Joe, my Susan's son, came into the business after a very successful 15-year career, corporate management in the manufacturing arena. So he's bringing a whole different mindset into the process of organizing. So it's actually 4 Van Hoosers that are working for a common goal. We see each other all the time. We work with each other very closely. We don't always agree, and there are 4 different personalities that we have to measure. But the one thing that we have said from, I don't know how many times we've said it, the number one thing is family. It's not business. We can all go find another job someplace if need to, but we can't build a family relationship. And so Alyson sometimes reminds us it's the same game. What is it, Alyson?
I say same team, same dream. You started saying same name, same game.
Yeah, she says same team, same dream. I say same name, got to be the same game. So it's not just she and I. It's even broader and further than that. So
I'll just build on that. I'll build on what you're saying, Phil. You said along those same lines, one of the things that we're pretty good at is when we're together on family time, we're not talking business. And sometimes we have to shut each other down. Not here. We're not doing it here. It can wait. And that's difficult whenever you love what you do and it's exciting. We love to talk business, but that's not always interesting to everybody else around. It's not interesting to my kids. It's not interesting to people who may not be in the business. So we're quick to shut each other down because we know same team, same dream. And the dream is family first.
Yeah, your grandkids and your kids have never said, Mom, Grandpa, tell me about your new keynote about
Yeah.
anything
Well,
that
let me say this.
unless it involves Santa Claus or birthday gifts.
One of my grandchildren, not Allison's child, fifth grader. So I don't know how old that is, 11 years old or something like that. The first week of school this year, the teacher asked him, "What do you want to do?" Fifth grader, she says, "I want to be a leadership development expert with Van Hooser Leadership." Now, whether or not she wants to do that or will actually do that or not is immaterial. But the fact of the matter is, the best place for us to start developing leaders is within that group of 11 grandchildren. And we're really dedicated to doing that as well.
At least she didn't say she wanted to be an influencer or anything like that. So that's refreshing. All right, then let's do a quick recap based on Phil and Alyson's legendary advice. Number one, think of your name not just as a name, but also as a brand. It's hard not to just think about your name on stage, but also if you talk about leadership, then is your brand your name as a speaker, or is it what you speak about and that expertise? Think about how you position that. Number two, Alyson made a great point, especially with leadership, is don't always be trendy. Phil notes as well that leadership is leadership is leadership. True in any era. And number three, when you get to know a mentor, if you have access to one, really close access, don't just look to tips and tricks, but look to their character. A good tip may last you a day or even a week, but a great character lesson can last you a lifetime. Phil and Alyson, I'm either going to see you at another NSA event or at another stage sometime soon. Any last closing thoughts before we speak ourselves off this stage anyway?
I simply say thank you for the service that you offer to NSA. The reality of it is we're all trying to serve in the spirit of Cavett, and that means giving more of ourselves than we're taking. But the interesting thing is the more we give of ourselves, the more we learn and grow and as individuals. So thank you for what you're doing with Speakeronomics and all that goes with that. Thank you for honoring us by allowing us to be a part of this conversation today.
Absolutely. Friends, make sure to join us at speakeronomics.com and let your voice be heard. I'm Kenneth Kinney, your host of the National Speakers Association's podcast, Speakeronomics, and this has been another fantastic episode of the show. Thank you, Phil and Alyson, for being part of NSA and for your entertaining advice to the show. And everyone listening, thank you for the privilege of your time. And remember, Speakeronomics is a podcast where you'll learn to speak, get paid, repeat,